The fire had died 2 nights ago, but the smell of smoke still clung to the air like a warning that refused to fade. Folks in town said the barn had gone up fast, too fast for anyone to save more than a few tools and scraps of gear. When the last flames were put out, nothing remained but a blackened frame and piles of ash that shifted in the wind. People walked past the wreckage with quiet voices and lowered eyes, certain the story of that barn had ended in loss. But then word spread of something strange, something impossible, and soon the entire community was whispering about the horse that had survived the fire. He was tall, dark-coated, and scarred along one side where the flames had grazed him. No one knew how he got out or how he managed to slip through the burning doorway without collapsing. Most believed he had bolted out of fear, guided by instinct more than sense. Yet the strangest part wasn't his survival. It was what came after. Each time someone led him away from the burned barn, he found his way back. No rope held him for long. No gate stopped him. He would appear in the early morning hours, standing quietly in front of the ashes, staring into the ruins as if searching for something only he remembered. The rancher who owned the barn tried everything to keep the horse away. He repaired fences, locked gates, and even moved the horse to a neighbor's pasture. But before sunrise the next day, the horse was always back again, standing among the charred timbers with a calm that unsettled everyone who saw it. Some folks said animals had strange memories, that they clung to places where they had suffered or survived. Others believed the horse was holding on to something that had been lost in the fire. A few whispered that animals could sense more than people knew, and the burned barn held secrets the flames had not destroyed. The rancher didn't know what to think. His life had already taken a sharp turn for the worse before the fire. The season had been rough, money was tight, and repairs on the ranch were piling higher than his patience. The barn had been the last place holding anything worth value. Saddles passed down through generations, hay stored for winter, tools worn smooth by work, and memories of long days spent raising horses. Losing it felt like losing a piece of his past, but seeing the horse return again and again stirred something inside him that he couldn't name. It made him uneasy, curious, and strangely protective. The horse's behavior drew the attention of folks from miles around. Riders, travelers, and townspeople came asking questions, leaning on fences, or standing along the road just to catch a glimpse of the scarred survivor. Some said the animal looked lost. Others felt he carried a purpose. A few older ranch hands even whispered that the horse had been trying to lead people somewhere, though no one could prove it. Still, the curiosity grew with each passing day. One afternoon, after spotting the horse near the ashes for the third time in a row, the rancher decided to get closer. He stepped quietly toward the burned frame, unsure if the horse would spook or flee. But instead of running, the animal lowered its head and watched him with calm, steady eyes. There was something haunting about the way it stood there, as if the destroyed barn held answers it refused to let go of. The rancher reached out a hand, slow and hesitant, brushing the horse's coat where the fire had left its mark. The animal didn't flinch. It simply stood as if waiting for him to understand. He looked around at the piles of ash, wondering if something had survived the flames. Maybe a tool had been buried, a bit of gear, or a charred board still holding some shape of memory. He walked through the ruins, stepping over burnt beams, feeling the crunch of coal under his boots. The horse followed behind him, stopping when he stopped, moving when he moved. It was strange, almost like the horse was guiding him without pushing. He knelt to sift through the debris, searching for anything the fire might have missed. But the ash offered no clues, no stories, no clear reason for the horse's return. As he stood, wiping soot from his hands, the horse lifted its head sharply, ears pointed toward the far end of the ruins. Its muscles tensed, not in fear but in alert focus. The rancher followed its gaze, but he saw nothing except broken boards and crumbled walls. Still, the horse's reaction unsettled him. He walked toward the spot the animal watched, though the smoky air made it hard to see clearly. As he stepped closer, the ground shifted under his boot. He paused, crouched down, and brushed the ash aside until he uncovered a cracked piece of wood. The moment he touched it, the horse moved closer, blowing warm breath along his shoulder in a way that felt almost intentional. He studied the board, but it wasn't unusual. Just a burnt plank. Yet the horse stayed pressed close to him, staring at the same spot as if insisting he wasn't done looking. The rancher dug deeper, clearing more of the debris. The soil beneath was still warm in places, but the deeper he went, the more he felt something tugging at the back of his mind. Not fear, but a sense of something waiting to be found. He stopped when he uncovered the corner of a small metal box, old, dented, and blackened from heat. His breath caught for a moment as he lifted it, surprised the fire hadn't melted it completely. It didn't look like anything he had stored in the barn. He didn't remember seeing it before the fire at all. The horse backed up a step, lowering its head toward the box as though it recognized it. The rancher held the box carefully, feeling an unexpected heaviness in his chest. He didn't open it. Not yet. Something told him the contents weren't meant to be revealed in haste. Later that evening, word spread about the box he found. People gathered near the rancher's porch, eager to know more. Some claimed it might contain money. Others said it could be old letters, keepsakes, or land papers. A few whispered it might hold clues to what started the fire. But the rancher kept the box close, refusing to open it until he understood more about why the horse had returned again and again. That night, he placed the box inside his cabin and stepped outside to check the pastures. To his surprise, the horse wasn't lying in its pen as it usually did. Instead, it stood near the hill overlooking the burned barn, staring at the darkened ruins the same way it had before. The rancher followed its gaze, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. There was something about the barn, something that refused to rest. The wind picked up, blowing ashes across the ground, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of light inside the fallen structure. Not fire, not a spark, but something faint and moving. He blinked hard, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The horse stepped forward, letting out a low sound he hadn't heard before, a sound filled with warning but also sadness. The rancher looked again toward the ruins, his heart beating faster. Something in that barn was still calling out. And the horse wasn't the only one that felt it. He didn't yet know what the metal box held or why the survivor kept returning. But he sensed the truth waiting just beyond what he could see, buried in ashes and memory. And as he stood there under the fading light, the feeling grew stronger, wrapping around him with a pull that promised the story was far from over. The days that followed the fire carried a strange weight, the kind that settled over the land like smoke that refused to drift away. Folks in town spoke in low voices whenever the burned barn came up, as if raising their tone might call back the flames. Even the wind seemed to move gently across the fields as though it knew something sacred had been disturbed. And in the middle of that uneasy quiet stood the horse others had started calling the fire survivor. The animal carried no fear in its stance, no confusion, only a steady pull toward the charred remains of the barn where everything had changed. The man who owned the land rose early each morning, long before the sun reached the tops of the pines. He would step outside with his boots still cold from the night and wait for the familiar sound of hooves in the distance. Without fail, the horse appeared from the far pasture, moving straight toward the barn ruins as if guided by something stronger than instinct. The man tried to block the path the first few mornings, unsure if the horse was hurting itself by returning to a place so filled with loss, but the animal would only stop at a distance and gaze past him with an expression that felt almost human. After a while, he let it go where it wished, though worry tugged at him each time. People from nearby farms often came by to offer help, kindness, or simple curiosity. They stood along the fence and watched the fire survivor pace among the fallen beams, stepping carefully over the blackened dirt. Some tried calling out to it or offering treats, but the horse barely reacted. It focused on the same corner of the barn every time, the sheltered part that used to hold storage barrels and an old leather saddle. The man wondered if the horse remembered something that the fire had erased, some detail that could not be spoken aloud. It was unsettling, but it drew attention. Word spread that the horse might be trying to show something hidden under the ashes, and that rumor alone kept people whispering whenever it walked by. The man was patient, but the mystery ate at him. He had lived through storms that ripped roofs clean off buildings and droughts that cracked the earth open, yet nothing felt as strange as watching that horse return day after day. One afternoon he followed it closely, studying every small movement as if the horse might reveal its reason by accident. When it stopped near the same corner, the man knelt beside the scorched boards and brushed away loose debris. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The horse exhaled in a long, steady breath, nudged the ground gently, then stepped back as though guiding him to look again. He hesitated, unsure if it was imagination or something more. He spent the next several days asking questions around town. Some folks believed the animal was simply grieving the loss of its old shelter. Others insisted animals had a way of sensing things people overlooked. A few even said the barn fire was no accident and the horse knew the truth. Those theories unsettled him more than he let on, though he kept them tucked away in the back of his mind while trying to handle the day-to-day chores. Still, the puzzle lingered. The more he watched the horse, the more he felt there was something behind its return. Something deeper than the simple pull of habit or comfort. Nightfall brought no answers. He often sat near the window, staring across the dim fields where the moonlight washed over the charred foundation. And each time he saw the horse standing near the ruins, calm and steady, it stirred a feeling he could not explain. The animal looked like a guardian keeping silent watch, the same way a person might stand by a grave to protect a memory from fading. As days turned into weeks, the man noticed subtle shifts in the horse's behavior. It began circling the barn ruins at dawn, pausing at different spots before returning to the familiar corner. It did the same routine at dusk, as if marking something only it understood. The man watched closely and took mental notes, though none of the patterns made sense yet. The horse's insistence created a quiet tension that spread across the ranch. Even the other animals seemed aware of the odd energy around the burned barn. Cattle kept their distance, and the barn dog refused to cross the charred dirt. This strange behavior grew stronger when a group of neighbors arrived one afternoon to help clear debris. They carried tools and good intentions, hoping to rebuild or at least tidy up the ruined foundation, but the horse reacted differently this time. As soon as the first plank was lifted, the animal pushed forward, nudging through the crowd with an urgency no one had seen before. It positioned itself between the workers and the corner it always watched. Ears pinned, stance firm, the horse blocked every attempt to move it. The men exchanged uneasy glances. It was rare to see a horse so determined, especially one with such a gentle nature. The man finally waved everyone away, promising he would handle the cleanup later. That night the man sat close to the horse, resting his hand on its neck, while the sky dimmed into a deep shade of blue. He spoke softly, not expecting an answer yet, hoping his calm voice would bridge the silent gap between them. He asked what it was guarding, what it wanted him to see, why it kept returning. The horse only shifted its weight and stared at the same corner, muscles tight as if the night itself held a warning. The man felt a chill run along his arms. Something was hidden there. He could sense it now as clearly as the horse did. The following morning he walked out early with the simple goal of paying closer attention. He followed the horse across the field again, but this time he kept his mind open to every detail. The air was cooler than usual. The wind carried a faint scent he did not recall from previous mornings, something earthy and metallic. As the horse reached the barn ruins, it stepped aside and turned its head toward him in a way that felt like an invitation. This moment felt different, almost like a threshold. The man knelt once more near the corner, brushing ash and dirt away with slow, careful movements. A glint of something caught the early sunlight. He leaned in closer, heart beating a little harder as the horse stood right behind him, breathing steadily. He pressed his fingers into the ground and felt a shift beneath the surface, as though something had been buried there long before the fire. His pulse quickened. He pushed a little harder, clearing more of the burnt dust. Still nothing visible. The horse gave a faint sound, not a cry or a whinny, but something in between, as if urging him to keep going. He stopped only when he sensed footsteps approaching from behind. A neighbor was crossing the field, calling out to him with a tone that held both curiosity and concern. The man hesitated, unsure whether to pause or continue. The horse moved closer, blocking the neighbor's view of the spot he was clearing. That single movement felt intentional, almost protective. The tension grew again, settling over the land with quiet heaviness. Something was hidden under that corner of the barn. Something the horse knew long before anyone else even suspected, and now the man could feel it too. Whatever truth lay beneath that burned ground was close enough to touch, close enough to change the entire story of the fire and everything that followed. He sat back on his heels, dust clinging to his hands, the horse standing tall beside him. The neighbor waited for an answer he did not give. The morning air seemed to hold its breath, the fields strangely still. The mystery pressing from beneath the ashes was no longer just a rumor or a passing worry. It was real, and it was waiting for him to uncover it. But he did not move, not yet, because now the weight of what he might find felt larger than the quiet corner of a burned barn. It felt like something that would change everything. The man stayed crouched beside the burned foundation long after the neighbor walked away. The horse had not moved an inch, standing guard over the corner like it always did. A restless energy stirred around them, as if the land itself waited for him to dig deeper. He had been trying to understand the fire survivors' strange pull to this place, but now the mystery felt heavier. Every morning the horse returned, every afternoon it paced, and every night it stood in that same spot as if protecting something hidden under the ash. The man felt the weight of the unknown growing inside him, knotting itself with worry and curiosity. The more he thought about it, the more he wondered whether the fire really happened the way everyone believed. Official word was that a lantern must have tipped over inside the barn, the flames catching old hay and climbing fast. But the man had always sensed something off. The fire moved unnaturally quick that night, too strong for a single lantern. And the horse's behavior made him question even more. Animals reacted to danger in honest ways. They did not pretend or exaggerate. They responded to truth. And this horse kept pushing him back to the same burnt spot, as though telling him the real story still waited under the charred ground. As the morning sun climbed higher, he stood and walked the length of the foundation, studying the blackened beams and singed boards that still clung to their shapes. He tried to recall where everything had been before the fire. He pictured the stalls, the tack area, the feed barrels, and the old storage corner where tools were kept. The fire survivor always fixated on that storage corner. It had held more than dust and forgotten rope. That area was where he used to stack the heavier items, things that would not burn easily, things worth checking. He reached the far side and knelt again, digging his fingers through ash until he hit hard-packed earth. Nothing unusual. Still, the words of a few neighbors echoed in his head, especially the ones who wondered whether the fire was set. Folks had hinted at trouble in the nearby hills. A few men had been drifting around the region, asking questions about land and property, turning up uninvited to ranches under the excuse of looking for work. No one trusted them much. The man had brushed off the rumors, but now they bothered him. Maybe someone had been near the barn that night? Maybe the fire survivor had seen something. Later that afternoon, he saddled one of the other horses and rode out along the fence line. He told himself it was just to clear his head. But truthfully, he wanted to check for any signs he had missed during the weeks after the fire. Burned trees, broken branches, footprints that might have gone unnoticed. Anything out of place. He followed the trail that ran behind the barn and dipped down toward the creek. Birds fled from the brush as he passed. The air smelled clean, fresher than it had near the ruins, but halfway down the path he noticed something. A patch of trampled grass beside the creek bank. Not recent, but not old either. Something heavy had rested there, maybe the weight of a horse or a person carrying something. He dismounted and crouched low, brushing the flattened blades with his fingertips. The soil beneath them tore easily, as if disturbed a while back. He scanned the area and found a faint track leading to the water. The creek had washed away most of the marks, but the direction was clear. Someone had passed through here the night of the fire or soon after. He felt a chill move through him. If someone had been near the barn that night, the horse might have known. That could explain why the animal behaved as if guarding a secret. Animals remembered danger more sharply than people. On his way back, he kept glancing toward the distant shape of the burned barn. The horse stood there again, still and steady, watching, waiting. The man felt the tension tighten even more, stretching across the land like a thin wire ready to snap. He knew he would have to uncover whatever lay beneath that corner, but he also knew he could not rush into it without understanding all the pieces. The next day brought heavier clouds and a chillier wind. The man spent the morning repairing fences, hoping the physical work might calm his thoughts. but his attention kept drifting to the fire survivor. The horse stayed close to the barn ruins, pacing more than usual, stopping every now and then to lift its head as if sensing something approaching. The man watched with growing unease. Animals rarely acted without reason. If it was restless, there had to be a cause. That afternoon, 2 men from town came by to talk. They mentioned a few riders passing through the area earlier in the week, strangers who asked too many questions about the wrench and the fire. They spoke with a tone that carried quiet warning. The man listened carefully, feeling the pieces shifting in his mind. Strangers, and a naturally fast fire, disturbed ground near the creek, and a horse determined to protect a corner of the barn. The story forming in his thoughts was not a pleasant one. As the visitors left, one of them paused and gave a long look toward the horse standing in the ruins. He asked whether the animal had acted strange before the fire. The man shook his head. Before that night, the horse had been calm, steady, predictable. Only afterward did it begin this unusual routine. The visitor nodded slowly, then said something that stayed with him. Sometimes animals notice things that people overlook. Sometimes they react to danger long before it arrives. Those words settled deep in the man's mind. He returned to the barn ruins and sat on a fallen beam, studying the horse as if seeing it for the first time. The animal walked up and lowered its head beside him, breathing warm air against his arm. He rested his hand gently on its muzzle. There was trust in the horse's eyes, but also urgency, as if it needed him to understand something important. The sun dipped lower, stretching shadows across the blackened ground. The man stood and stepped toward the corner again, but he did not kneel this time. Instead, he walked the perimeter slowly, imagining what the barn looked like before the fire. He pictured the layout, the walls, the storage barrels, and then a thought struck him. During the fire, he remembered hearing a sharp popping sound from that very corner. At the time, he assumed it was wood splitting from heat, but now he wondered if it might have been something else. Something hidden inside the storage area that reacted to the flames in a way he had not understood. The possibility made his chest tighten. If something had been stored there without his knowledge, or placed there by someone else, the horse might be guarding the spot for a reason. Not simply out of memory, but out of warning. A sudden gust of wind swept across the ruins, scattering ash and loose dirt. The horse jerked its head and stared toward the open fields as if hearing something distant. The man listened too, but all he heard was the low whistle of the wind. Still, the tension in the air grew stronger, like the moment before a storm arrives. As darkness approached, he considered staying outside through the night. The horse remained alert, shifting its weight from one leg to the other, glancing between the burned barn and the far tree line. The man felt the pull of fear and determination wrestling inside him. Something was coming together, the clues tightening around the truth, yet he still lacked the final piece. He knew one thing for certain. The fire survivor was not returning to the barn out of habit or sorrow. It was guiding him, warning him, pointing toward something buried beneath the charred boards and the history that lay hidden in the dirt. The mystery was far from solved, and the tension only grew heavier. But he could sense he was closer now, close enough that whatever truth the horse guarded might soon rise to the surface, whether he was ready for it or not. The night settled heavy and slow around the ranch, the kind of night that felt as if the land held its breath. The man sat on the porch with a lantern beside him, its soft glow reaching only a few steps into the yard. Beyond that, everything was swallowed by darkness except for the faint outline of the horse near the burned barn. Even in the dim light he could see it standing in that same corner, head lifted, ears forward, body tense like a guard waiting for something unseen. Every time he thought he'd gotten used to the animal's strange behavior, something about it felt even more urgent. He tried to distract himself with small tasks, but his thoughts kept circling back to the fire, the disturbed ground by the creek, the strangers who had been asking questions, and the way the horse reacted to any sound drifting from the woods. The tension pushed against him from all directions. Deep down he knew something was building, something that involved the truth of that burned barn. And the horse knew it too? A sudden rustle came from the far tree line. The horse's head snapped toward the sound. The man stiffened and leaned forward, listening hard. The wind was calm, not strong enough to move branches with that much force. His pulse quickened. He rose slowly from the porch and took a few steps forward, the dirt cold under his boots. He stayed still, waiting. The sound grew clearer, not like an animal wandering, but like footsteps dragging through brush. The man's breath caught. He grabbed the lantern and moved closer to the barn ruins. The horse shifted anxiously, stamping the ground. He placed one hand on its neck to steady it. The warmth of the animal grounded him, but he could feel its fear trembling through its muscles. Whatever was approaching, the horse sensed it long before he did. The sound stopped. Silence spread across the fields with a weight that pressed against his chest. Then another sound came, softer this time, like someone stepping carefully to avoid detection. The man's throat tightened. He scanned the darkness between the trees, wishing the lantern could reach farther. In moments like this, even familiar land could feel unfamiliar. He whispered to the horse, calming it, though his own nerves were stretched tight. The horse nudged him gently, not out of fear, but as though urging him to stay alert. The bond between man and animal deepened through moments like these, when instinct met instinct. A shadow shifted at the edge of the tree line. The man froze. The lantern flame flickered in the breeze, casting long, shaky shapes across the ground. He tried to focus, to understand what he was seeing. Someone was out there, and they were edging closer, slow and deliberate. His mind raced back to the visitors from town who warned him about strangers scouting the area. He remembered how the fire spread too fast to be an accident. The pieces that once drifted loosely now snapped together, forming a picture he had tried to avoid. Someone had been near the barn the night it burned. Someone who didn't want the truth known. And maybe that person had come back. He stepped backward, guiding the horse with him toward the open yard. The animal followed, muscles tight, eyes fixed on the dark woods. The man didn't want to panic, but he needed to be ready, not for a fight, but for clarity, for whatever was coming. He kept telling himself there had to be a reason the horse kept returning to this place, and maybe he was about to learn it firsthand. A low crunch sounded again from the brush. The man raised the lantern higher. A figure stepped into the moonlight. Not close enough to see clearly, but close enough that he could tell the person was watching him. The man held his ground, though his heart hammered hard. The horse shifted closer to him, nearly pressing against his side. The figure did not move forward or back. They simply stood there, half hidden by the trees, like someone undecided about their next step. The man waited, breath slow and controlled. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of burned wood from the ruins behind him. The horse exhaled sharply, ears pinned forward, gaze locked onto the shadow in the trees. After a long moment, the figure stepped away from the tree line and disappeared back into the woods. Gone as quietly as they came. The man stayed frozen, lantern held high. He listened, but the sound of retreat faded quickly. The horse finally relaxed a small amount, though its body remained alert. The man set the lantern gently on the ground and leaned against the horse's shoulder. The brush with danger had passed, but it had left him with more questions than answers. By morning, the tension in the air had not eased. The man barely slept, lying awake and thinking through every moment of the previous night. When the sun finally rose, he walked back to the edge of the woods to inspect the area where the figure had stood. The ground showed faint impressions of boots, partly smoothed by wind but clear enough to confirm what he already knew. Someone had come to watch him, and they wanted to stay hidden. He returned to the barn ruins with a new sense of urgency. The horse waited there again, calmer than last night but still standing close to the same foundation corner. When he approached, the animal took a step back, giving him space. It was as if the horse knew he was finally ready to see what lay beneath. The man crouched and began brushing away ash and dirt with careful hands. The ground felt different here, harder in some places, softer in others. He dug deeper, clearing away burned wood scraps and small stones. Sweat gathered on his forehead despite the cool morning. He kept going, driven by a steady pulse of determination. After a while, his fingers hit something flat, not rock. Not soil, something man-made. He brushed away more dirt, revealing a small metal bracket partly buried. His breath caught. He dug around it, uncovering the corner of a wooden box, charred but still intact beneath the layers of ash. The horse stepped in closer, lowering its head as if confirming that he had finally found what it had been guarding all along. The man pulled more debris away from the box. It was heavier than he expected, with iron hinges and a thick latch. The fire had scorched the outside, but the structure held strong. He swallowed hard, hands trembling slightly. The box looked old, older than the barn itself. Nothing inside that storage corner should have been untouched by the fire, yet this box had survived. He lifted it slowly, careful not to break the weakened wood. The horse snorted softly beside him, restless but not fearful. The man felt the tension inside him coil tighter. Whatever was inside this box had driven the horse to return again and again. And whatever the figure in the woods wanted, it was connected to this. He carried the box to the porch and set it gently on a crate. The latch was stiff, half melted, but still functional. He hovered his hands over it, unsure if he was ready to open it yet. The weight of the moment pressed against him. Ounces waited under that lid. Ounces that could explain the fire, the strange visitors, the horse's behavior, and the figure in the woods. But once he opened it, there would be no going back. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The horse stood near the porch now, watching him with calm, trusting eyes. The bond between them had grown stronger through every trial. That trust gave him the courage to move forward. He placed his fingers on the latch, lifted it slowly, and felt the box loosen under his grip. The tension swelled around him, thick enough to feel in his chest. He lifted the lid only an inch before pausing again, heart pounding against his ribs. Whatever truth waited inside was about to surface, and he could sense it would change everything for him and for the fire survivor that had guided him this far. He finally opened the lid all the way. But before he could see what was inside, a sharp sound broke the quiet, coming from the direction of the woods. A sound he had heard once before. Someone was returning. And this time they were not trying to stay hidden. When the dust settled after the last rush of chaos, everything felt strangely still, like the world needed a moment to breathe before allowing anyone to move again. The tension that had filled the air for so long finally began to loosen, even though everyone still stood frozen from the shock of how close things had come to falling apart. The danger had been real, and the consequences could have changed all of their lives forever. Yet here they were, standing together with a new sense of calm rising around them. It was the first sign that the long fight, the long fear, and the long chase toward answers had brought them exactly to where they were meant to be. For a moment no one spoke. It was as if words would break something fragile in the air, something that needed a chance to settle before they shaped it into meaning. But slowly, piece by piece, the relief began to spread. A tired smile formed on a face that hadn't smiled in days. A worried hand loosened its grip. Someone let out a slow breath, almost like they had been holding it for half their life. Everything had been building toward this moment, and now that it had arrived, all the weight that had been pressing on their shoulders finally felt like it could slip to the ground. They turned toward each other, understanding what the moment meant without needing to say anything. The long road they had walked, filled with doubt, fear, old wounds, and buried conflicts, had finally reached a point where they could stand with certainty instead of confusion. For all the mistakes made along the way, for all the times they questioned themselves and each other, they were here because they chose not to give up. They faced everything the story threw at them, and now they could finally begin to look forward rather than backward. The first to break the silence was the one who had carried the heaviest guilt. He stepped toward the others, rubbing the back of his neck like he wasn't sure if he even deserved to speak. His voice was low at first, but it was steady. He apologized, not with dramatic words but with honesty. He admitted the mistakes he made, the choices that had hurt others, and the fear that had pushed him into silence for too long. He explained how he had let pressure and confusion twist his decisions, and how he regretted the distance it created between them. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding, because he knew forgiveness needed to come naturally, not forced. To his surprise, the others didn't turn away. They listened with patience that showed just how much they had grown throughout everything they had survived. They knew the truth of his heart, even when his actions had fallen short. One of them stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder, telling him that mistakes don't erase the good in someone unless they choose to let it. The bond between them, once strained, felt like it had been reforged stronger than before. With the main conflict finally easing, The subplots that had been hanging open throughout the journey also found their place. The old misunderstanding that caused distance between two characters was finally cleared when they both shared the reasons behind their guarded behavior. Another character, who had been doubting their worth, realized through this last challenge that they had more strength and wisdom than they ever believed. Even the quietest character, the one who rarely spoke unless it mattered, stepped forward during the chaos and proved how essential they were to the team. Now, in the calm after everything, they had the confidence to stand proudly, knowing they weren't invisible anymore. As the group walked away from the scene of the climax, the world around them seemed brighter, lighter, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since the beginning of the story. The land that once felt heavy with tension now seemed full of possibility. The wind carried a softer tone, almost like it was guiding them into a new chapter of their lives. The setting itself felt like it was healing along with them. Small details they hadn't noticed before suddenly stood out, from the gentle sway of the grass to the warmth of the sky that had been hidden behind clouds for too long. The road ahead didn't feel frightening anymore. It felt open, welcoming, and full of hope. They walked with new purpose, knowing that even though challenges may still appear in the future, they now had the strength, trust, and unity to face anything. They had learned what it meant to stand together, and that understanding was worth more than any victory they could have imagined at the beginning. Later, when they gathered at the place they all considered home, the atmosphere was filled with quiet joy. Conversations that had once been full of tension now flowed easily. Laughter, faint at first, grew back into their lives. The heaviness that had followed them for so long lifted, leaving room for healing. They shared memories of what they had been through, not with sorrow, but with the awareness that every step mattered in bringing them to this point. They understood each other better now. They understood themselves better as well. Small celebrations took shape. Someone cooked a meal that reminded them of better days. Someone else lit a lantern and set it at the edge of the porch, symbolizing the end of darkness and the return of comfort. Someone repaired something that had been broken for months, finally having the energy and spirit to take care of the little things again. Every small action carried meaning, showing how deeply the conflict had affected them and how meaningful their recovery was now. The main character, who had struggled the most with courage, stood quietly for a while, reflecting on everything that had happened. They felt a warmth spreading through their chest, the kind that comes when you finally understand why you had to go through everything you did. They realized that all the fear, all the uncertainty, and all the pressure had pushed them to grow into someone stronger, wiser, and more grounded. They weren't the same person who started the journey, and for the first time in a long while, they were proud of who they had become. In the remaining hours of daylight, the group talked about their futures, not with fear, but with dreams. They shared plans for rebuilding, for exploring, for improving their lives. A sense of possibility filled the air, and the happiness that had been missing for so long returned slowly, like a sunrise. They understood now that life wasn't just about surviving conflict, but about learning from it and choosing where to go next. As the final moment of the story approached, the sun dipped low and cast a golden glow across the land. It felt symbolic, like the world itself was giving them a gentle promise that better days were ahead. They stood together, looking out at everything they had fought to protect. The peace they felt wasn't the kind that comes suddenly. It was the kind that settles into the heart after a long journey, reminding you that endings can be gentle when earned with sincerity. Before they went inside for the night, the main character turned back for one last look at the horizon. The wind brushed softly against their face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they felt truly calm. Everything they had faced, everything they had feared, had led to growth, unity, and a renewed sense of purpose. They knew the future would bring new stories, but for now, this ending felt exactly right. A full-circle moment wrapped not in dramatic twists, but in peace. And with that quiet understanding, the story reached its natural close, leaving behind a message of resilience, trust, hope, and the gentle reminder that even the hardest journeys can lead to happy endings when people choose to stand together.